All right, so what are we talking about today? Well, I think we're going to do a brief video on human biology because, you know, I understand that these ideas of order and chaos, love and fear, and good and evil, they sound pretty abstract to the average individual who's coming into contact with this stuff. So I figured why not make a video to show you how these expressions, these forces, actually express themselves within human biology at the cellular level. And I thought of that because, it does play a massive role in our biology, and because, I feel like more people have a bit of grounding in cellular biology and biology at large because, most of us were taught that that subject in school. So why not utilize something that you guys understand as an example that we can use to better understand these expressions, and in particular, love and fear. And so, first and foremost, let me just lay the foundations of cellular biology and what I'm going to be talking about, and then we'll move on from there. And so we just have to start with a simple idea. The idea is that our cells are controlled by our environment, by the environment that they find themselves in. And so if we just do a simple science experiment, if you remove a few stem cells out of a human body and put them into a petri dish, well, first they'll probably die pretty quickly if you don't first put them into a culture medium. A culture medium is just this gooey substance that simulates the insides of a human body. Cells need it to simulate a livable environment for them, so that they can survive when they're put inside of a petri dish. And so, just like human individuals who have a tendency to survive more effectively within a culture themselves, so do our cells. I just find that interesting. But getting to the actual science experiment here. So, if you fill the petri dish with a good environment, with a healthy culture medium, those cells will grow and proliferate fairly well. So if you take those healthy cells out of the good environment, out of the good culture medium, and then you put them into a petri dish that's filled with a bad culture medium, a bad environment that makes a culture medium that makes the cells sick, those same cells will start to get sick. They'll stop proliferating, they'll stop growing, and they'll start to die. I know right now we're not doing anything very ingenious here. It's fairly obvious that this is what will happen. And then if we take the process and take it one step further, what will occur if you take the cells, the sick and dying cells, out of the bad culture medium, out of the bad environment, and then put them back into the petri dish with the good culture medium, the healthy culture medium? Well, the cells will start to get better, they'll start to grow again, and they'll start to proliferate again. And I know this is a very simple science experiment, very obvious. And so, what this simple experiment shows us is that our cells, us, because we're made of cells, are a complement to our environment. Good environment causes growth in cells, bad environment causes sickness and death in cells. And your cells, meaning you, because we're all made up of cells, are thus determined by the environment by which they find themselves in. Okay? And so this is where it gets pretty interesting, because it's not the actual environment that you find yourself in that actually controls our cells. It's how you perceive the environment that determines the fate of all your cells, all 40 trillion of them or whatever. And your perceptions are determined by you, by your mind. So, just for a simple example of what I'm saying here, our body feels the temperature of the environment that it finds itself in, right? It feels temperature, and then when you feel cold, for example, you start feeling cold, the brain will send messages to nerves all over your body that kind of ask your muscles to tighten and loosen very rapidly to warm you up. And it's doing that to try to warm you up. We call that shivering. And it does that because when muscles start to move, it generates heat for us. It gets us warmer. And the reason for me pointing that out is that feeling temperature is a completely subjective phenomenon. Experiencing the environment is a completely subjective phenomenon. And that's how you get people who are existing in the exact same room with the thermostat saying that it's 69 degrees, and some people are cold and some people are warm, and it's all based upon their own individualistic perceptions and how they currently feel, maybe what they've eaten, and also how they feel about what is cold and what is warm. And it's also the same thing when if you have a girlfriend and you're a guy and you try to touch the shower, your girlfriend's taking a shower, and you try to see how the water is, and it melts your hand because your girlfriend can handle 10,000 degree temperatures and you cannot. And that's also a subjective perception. And so what we see here is that your mind actually governs over, it rules over, it controls your cell's experience based on how it perceives the outside environment, and then it tries to create coherence between the outside environment and its perceived inner environment, as within, so without. And it does this through external and internal signals from our senses, and from its perception of the signals and our belief structures, it tells your cells what to do and how to feel. And this means that you're creating your environment within your body, and your cells act accordingly based upon the created environment that you create based upon your perceptions. And to get a handle on what I'm trying to say here is that just for a simple example of your liver cells, well, your liver cells are never going to experience the outside world. There's only a few types of cells that actually experience the outside world. Your skin cells and your eyeballs and stuff like that. But for the most part, your liver cells, 100% of them, are never going to experience the outside world. So what they do is they rely on your mind to tell them how to react through our chemistry. And it does this through the nervous system, and it does this through our blood, and it creates this inner environment, an inner culture within us. And so you're doing this at all times throughout your entire body. You're doing, and your body's regulating these things and trying to create a coherence between the outer environment and the inner environment. So if you're cold, it's trying to warm you up, and if you're too warm, it tries to cool you down with sweat and stuff like that. So that's just examples. It's doing this in all sorts of different ways as well. And since this process is based on your own subjective interpretation of what's going on, this means that you're actually in control of your biology. Since it's a subjective process, you're in control of your body based upon how you decide to perceive the environment. And that's how you're able to convince yourself to take a cold shower or go out in the cold in a short sleeve shirt, and you say, no, it's warm, I'm fine, I'm doing good. And you may actually be suffering a little bit, but then over time, as you get used to it and acclimate, you can really convince yourself to do all sorts of things that you never thought was possible. And so the point is that when you change your mind, you change how you perceive the information that's coming in from the outside environment, and then the mind tells the brain, the nervous system, what chemistry should be released, what we should tell our inner environment, as to what's going on outside, so that they can act accordingly. And so when the chemistry is released, it travels through the nervous system and into our blood and all of that stuff, and it changes the chemistry of your inner environment to create, again, coherence between the outer world and our inner world. Your cells then react to the environmental signals created by the chemistry of the nervous system, created by the chemistry of your brain. And so we can tell, and this is through the science of signal transduction and epigenetics, we now know that these signals control our behavior to a great degree and control our genes to a very interestingly great degree as well. And so yes, epigenetics epi means above, and then genetics above genes. Above the genes, what's above the genes? The environment is above the genes, and it takes the signals from the environment, and then it actually affects our genes and our behavior and our actions in the outside world. And I find that very interesting. And if you want to know how all of that works, I will be making a video on it way later down the road. And we'll talk about signal transduction and epigenetics and how all of that works, how the signals go into the cells and start affecting our DNA and all that stuff. But you don't need to know that stuff for this video, because for this video that you have to understand is that you change your perception. If you change your perception, this will change your mind, and that will change your inner world, which thus ultimately changes you, who you are, your inner environment. And so We create our own biology, and this is the key to how it all works. And so going back to the natural law expressions video, we get the generative polarities of love and fear. And what is the expansive force for consciousness? That is love, correct. And so when your mind perceives love, certain chemicals are actually released within your body. These include things like dopamine, oxytocin, the love hormone, vasopressin, and growth hormones. And the significance of this is that these cells and neurotransmitters cause cells to grow exuberantly well. Going back to our original example, we're creating a healthy culture medium within ourselves when these chemicals, when these particular hormones and neurotransmitters are released throughout our body. And so if you're filling your environment, your inner world, with these chemicals that are created from the feeling the expression of love, your cells will be very, very happy, and they will grow and proliferate very, very well. So what we have here is a biological proof to the expression of expanding consciousness, because these chemicals create a culture medium within us that feeds our cells. Love actually feeds cells. The feeling of love feeds cells, and it's a subjective interpretation based upon you choosing the binary option between love and fear. And so the expression of consciousness expanding feeds cells. You are cells. You physically, this is the interesting part, you actually physically are expanding your environment which is created by love. And you actually physically expand with the expansive force for consciousness, because your cells will be able to grow more effectively and proliferate more effectively as well in an environment with these neurotransmitters and hormones going off in them. So I actually needed to do a cut here to just let that sink in for a second. Let that sink in. You express love. Love releases chemicals that allow your being to grow better. You grow better. You actually expand with consciousness. Your growth hormones are things that allow your cells to grow more effectively. Dopamine allows you to look into things, just like the start of the generative polarity, becoming open to truth. Dopamine is what helps us do that. And oxytocin is the love hormone. There's plenty of studies on that hormone as well. And so that's a wonderful thing. I find that to be incredible, really. And then it gets even more incredible when we look at the generative polarity and the contracting force for consciousness, which is correct. It's fear. So, in contrast, the contracting force for consciousness is fear. And when your mind perceives fear, other chemicals are released in the body. And these include things like cortisol, norepinephrine, cytokines, cytokines, and histamines. These are stress hormones and inflammatory agents. These chemicals are designed to stop your cells from growing. The expression of consciousness contracting, fear, stops the growth of cells, and if you're experiencing an environment made up of these types of chemicals, your cells will start to get sick, and sooner than usual, they'll start to die. And so you physically contract in an environment created by fear. You actually contract with consciousness contracting, with fear. When the feeling of fear is experienced, again, at the subjective level, when you choose to move forward with the contracting force for consciousness at the generative from the generative polarity. And I find that incredibly fascinating and very useful to know. So, as already stated, the generative polarity of love and fear, whether we experience love or whether we experience fear, is entirely dependent upon the binary option of selecting whether to express natural law as a positive force that expands your consciousness or as a negative force that contracts your consciousness. It is your choice. And so, this is the one and only thing that we as conscious beings get to choose in our determined universe, how we choose to perceive our environment. And this is the choice between love and fear. It's the choice between good and evil. It's the choice between order and chaos in your life. And it's the choice between right action and wrong action, and truth and falsity. And so, at this point, I hope that it's becoming more and more clear that we need to come to know the objective difference between good and evil, right action and wrong action, order and chaos, love and fear, so that we can guarantee, or at the very least raise the probability, that we choose love over fear, good over evil, order over chaos, right over wrong, truth over falsity, because the very lives of ourselves, what we are made out of, the very lives of ourselves, us, what we're made out of is very much depends upon it. And so we're going to be moving forward and diving deeper into what exactly that means, what exactly the objective difference between right and wrong is, how it connects to our consciousness and our conscience, and how all of that interacts with each other as we get more and more specific along our road from the generalities, the general principles of natural law, and we move towards understanding the human condition, understanding humans at a general level as well. And so that's what we're going to be doing in the later videos. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one where we get into that. And so, have a great weekend, everybody.